Good morning everyone and welcome back to this new chess video. Finally, the day of chess traps has arrived. Yes guys, but I haven't gone crazy. Of course, we'll look at the most common chess traps, but we'll see how to defend ourselves against chess traps, not how to set them. That's because, as I always tell you, let's try not to use these little tricks that are good for beating one or two opponents. Complete beginners, and they don't help us improve or learn anything about the game. It's fine to know them, but don't overuse them. So today we'll look at all the main traps, or rather we'll try to see a couple of them, and maybe I'll make other videos where we'll look at some more. Anyway, let's start with some from the King's game, which are also the most common ones. That's because in the King's game, also known as open play, the positions are a bit more aggressive, so it's more common for there to be traps. Let's begin our journey with the ultimate trap. That is to say, in this specific position, the move knight to d4. Which is famously known as the Blackpool Gambit. I have to say, this gambit is really tempting for beginners, for those who have just started playing chess. Why? Because obviously here white thinks, what? I could capture a pawn and then I also attack f7 with my pieces. Why on earth would black make such a stupid move? Knight to d4? Well, they take the bait and capture on e5. And this of course is the most common mistake. With this gambit, we shouldn't capture on e5. Why? Because what happens here? Queen to g5. Queen to g5 is a double attack, and if we keep making mistakes, right? A double attack on the rook and the queen. Well, we can resign, because after queen takes on g2, now we attack the rook with check, the rook moves, and there's this very interesting move that leads to a smothered mate. Obviously now I can't defend with the queen, because of course I lose the queen. But even bishop to e2 is just as bad, because knight to f3 is checkmate and I lose the game. So let's say the basic idea of this Blackburn gambit is exactly this. At this point though, how do we refute this gambit? Well, with the simplest move in the world, knight takes d4. Conceptually, we understand it right away. Black has wasted two moves to exchange a piece that, let's say, had only moved once. Let's also remember that black, since they started one move behind, was already slightly behind in development, and now they've lost another tempo. And so this development disadvantage will cost him dearly. Let's see how things continue, but I have to say it's pretty straightforward. White castles and continues developing. Black, in quotes, has also damaged their structure, even if they've gained some space. White is very comfortable, but let's see how to continue. Knight to f6 attacks the center, and at this point we could also calmly defend it with d3. Why not play rook to e1? A move that activates the rook, defends the pawn, and obviously denies black any chances. Any possible d5 ideas are prevented because I can capture with check. At this point black continues with d6, and again here we could continue with any move, even d3. Developing the pieces, and white would simply be fine. But here there is a very strong way to officially refute this gambit, which is the move c3. The move c3 attacks the center and above all introduces another problem into the position after pawn takes c3. Or in any case, after any other move by black comes the move queen to b3. This is a terrible move because it attacks the f7 square, which can only be defended with the sad queen to e7, and at this point knight takes c3. The knight develops, and one day it will also want to reach d5, attacking the queen. For example, g6, because now the bishop can no longer develop on this side, and I have to develop it on the other side. But obviously there's not enough time, because after d4 and e5, white opens the center and black has simply lost. For example, pawn takes e5, rook takes e5. Game over, obviously. And the rest, let's say, doesn't work either. For example, if he moves the knight, I can simply attack the knight, which has no useful squares. It has to go back to the miserable h6. And at this point, as I mentioned before, knight to d5 basically creates several problems. Now I'll capture with a discovered attack on d6. In short, it's not even worth commenting on. So you've seen this gambit, this Blackburn gambit. It's really a gambit that can only work against a beginner who, in this position, makes a mistake and basically plays knight takes e5. Let me also add a little note. In my first national youth championship when I was 10, I tried to play this gambit as black, and my opponent didn't fall for it. And he played knight takes d4. I won the game anyway, but I have to say it was a really close call, so don't try this gambit, not even if you're just starting out, because at best it might work once, but after that your opponents will catch on and play this move against you. And here white is fine with any legal move. Another gambit I want to show you, which is in the two knights defense, the one I always call fegatello. To make your life easier here, the move, knight to g5. At this point, I've shown you in several videos the main move d5 and the correct way to play as black. If you haven't seen them, of course you can go back and watch them. Here, however, some people try this move, which is also called the Traxler. This move is one of those gambits that, let's say, is often promoted on YouTube by several channels that don't really provide good chess information, because in this position they only show you the wrong moves for white. And in particular, they show you the move. Knight takes on f7, which, okay, from a certain point of view is natural, because knight takes f7, captures a pawn and attacks two pieces. However, it's completely wrong, because here black has this trap available. Bishop takes on f2 with the idea that after king takes on f2, knight takes on e4 follows. The king has to retreat to g1. And at this point comes the devastating queen to h4, which obviously threatens mate in one. So I can't capture the rook. And even on g3, black has the possibility to sacrifice this knight in order to activate their rook on f8. And I can tell you that this position, even though the engine still says it's equal, is extremely difficult. Because here the only move that keeps equality is knight to c3, which still isn't that easy to play. Everything else is basically a lost game, so the gambit does have its logic. However, this gambit is also pretty silly, because in this position, white can simply play bishop to f7. This move isn't even shown. In the videos where they promote this gambit, who knows who would have thought these incredible chess tricks that supposedly refute the game of chess. After king to e7, okay, there's a threat, be careful. Now, if white castles, obviously the move h6 comes, who would have guessed? Black attacks the piece, and if the piece moves, he loses the bishop. Obviously, white's response is very simple. He just needs to move the bishop, and both bishop to d5, bishop to c4, or bishop to b3 are fine. Personally, I recommend this move to you, bishop to c4, which isn't the most commonly played move. I don't know why, but in my opinion, it's the strongest move, and Stockfish agrees. At this point, black plays the move. Rook to f8. There are not any other logical moves. Black tries to develop some kind of activity, but we can already castle. And even here, I could end the analysis and tell you that obviously white has an excellent position. I have an extra pawn here. And of course, black's king is in the center. So what more could you want from life? I'll just show you the last two moves. h6, knight to f3, knight takes e4. No, white manages to recover this pawn. However, of course, he gets the pawn back, but black still has the king on e7. How do we take advantage of this? With the move knight to c3, we trade off these knights so that obviously we have a completely open position. So it's true that we've given the material back to our opponent, but we've reached a position where, come on guys, what are we even talking about? The king on e7? The position is unplayable for black, also because with the bishop on c4, it's not easy for black to get the king to safety, so the position is simply devastating for white. So as you can see, this Traxler gambit is also a pretty silly attempt. Because sure, okay, fine, if here, thank you, white makes a mistake, plays knight takes f7, there's bishop takes f2, but if white doesn't make a mistake and plays bishop takes f7, obviously, let's say black's position becomes quite convoluted. And let me remind you that the Byzantines went extinct. Okay. I'll also show you a gambit in the queen's pawn game. d4, d5, c4, e5, Actually, this is a fairly respectable gambit, or rather, it's the Albin counter gambit. What's the trap in the counter? Albin counter gambit. After pawn takes e5, what should we do? This move must be played. Here, some people play e3 to avoid complications, but it's not a good idea to play e3 because obviously black, let's say, has already taken a space that he usually doesn't deserve, or at least can't take so easily. And so this move must be made. At this point, the move is d4. And the trap of this counter gambit is that in case of e3, of course, e3 seems like a logical move, right? I want to remove this pawn on d4 that's bothering me and has taken a lot of space. But here the trap is bishop, b4 check. And at this point, let's say we have to defend our king. If we defend with the knight, we lose control of e3. The problem is that even defending with the bishop, we lose control of e3. It's the same with white, who can now capture the piece on b4. The best move here would be to capture on e3, but you see, black has achieved their goal. White's position is completely lacking structurally, and very soon they're going to lose this pawn on e5. And yet bishop takes b4 is even worse, because after pawn takes f2, check, the king can't move away because the queen is under attack. And even worse, after king to e2 comes the surprise, pawn takes knight, check. So first of all, we get a free piece, but the most important thing is that we've removed the knight, which was a piece that could defend f3, and at this point, after bishop to g4, check, the queen is lost. And the game is practically lost. So this gambit, let's say, has its own meaning, but here we have some easy moves to avoid it. For now, we play knight to f3. This is also a natural move. Let's say we attack the pawn and black will defend the pawn. Now there are two variations here. I'll show you both, but then I'll recommend one to you. The a3 variation, in my opinion, is the strongest in this position for a master. However, the move a3, what is the purpose of this move? A3, it's to prevent bishop to b4 check, right? But in reality, white doesn't play e3 afterwards. So for example here, after bishop to g4, we have to be very precise, because if we play here, e3, then comes knight takes e5. And obviously black has a great initiative. And even after knight to e7, the move here, knight to e7. I'll show you this shortly as well. It's a useful move for black, who wants to play knight to g6 to recapture the pawn. Here too, e3 doesn't work, because once again, bishop to g4 always gives us a lot of trouble. And here the move for white is b4, knight to g6, and bishop to b2. So let's say white tries to ignore the central situation, so he doesn't want to play e3, but wants to develop on the queen side. It's a very strong variation, but in my opinion, we have another equally strong line that's perfectly fine, and we basically don't need to know anything, also because it's very logical. What is the other variation? g3. Why is it very logical? Because simply, I want to develop my pieces without getting hit. This bishop to b4, so for example here, the best move for black is immediately knight to e7, because here black absolutely has to recapture this pawn. And we let him do it. Retake it, no problem. Bishop to g2. Knight to g6, and at this point, short castle. We give back the pawn, no problem. Knight takes, knight takes, knight takes. And here, simply, we're in a position where we've given back the material, so we're even. But we definitely have a development advantage. We've already completed the development of the king, and we've castled. Our bishop will be very strong on this diagonal. And here, basically, white is in a good position with any plan or move you choose here. For example, in my opinion, the simplest plan is to play b3 and develop the pieces. Another plan could be to play knight to a3 and then knight to c2. In short, here white can't be worse, and in any case will have an excellent position. So the Albin counter gambit, as you can see, is a dangerous weapon, but it's not that difficult to neutralize. Another gambit I want to show you is quite interesting. This one is played by white against the Scandinavian defense. f4, d5, pawn takes, queen takes d5. This is the Scandinavian defense. And so here white tries to pull off this trick, knight to f3, leaving the pawn on e4 hanging, which of course we capture. And after knight, the trick is based on this idea. After knight f6, d3, white gives us this other pawn as well. Let's say, to make their own development easier. And at this point, the trap, guys, is this, h6. I want to chase away this knight, but here comes the trap. Knight takes f7, attacking both pieces. King takes f7 and bishop to g6, a discovered attack. And we're basically forced to lose the queen. So, guys, this trap is really a cheap trick. Because here, instead of playing h6, we can start with the knight first. See a6, developing a piece while defending the queen, and after that, whatever move white plays, now we can play h6, because now, obviously, if knight takes, king takes, and here our queen is defended. So the trap, let's say, is countered in a very, very simple way like this. But since I saw it recently, I also want to show you a master level variation, specifically against the knight. g5 against this gambit. And here there's this variation, in my opinion, very strong, that I would play, which is e5. This is because in chess openings, guys, the concept of development is important. So I don't necessarily want to hold on to this pawn at all costs just to then give white, let's say, a certain initiative, whether good or bad. But on the contrary, even as an attacking player, I want to move forward with development. And here e5 is very strong, because after knight takes e4, f5. Black, let's say, has already achieved the central pawn duo. In short, this doesn't happen often with black. The only thing to keep in mind here is that since we've weakened this diagonal, we potentially want to castle long. And so after knight c6, bishop to c4, here we play this move queen to d6, with the aim of developing and obviously also defending the possible bishop. 6, so short castle, bishop to e6, bishop takes, queen takes. And now in any case we'll castle long. And white simply has a rather miserable position, with black bringing his pieces into play easily, enjoying a space advantage in the center that can't be contested so easily, because, for example, after f4, white immediately gets hit with bishop to c5 for free. And then here, this isn't even a threat. I can just continue developing, for example, because if you take this pawn, you see how it's black who is creating an attack, not white. So white has to be very careful with his position, which risks, let's say, becoming lost within 3 or 4 moves. Alright guys, today I showed you these gambits in chess openings. Of course there are many others, but today I tried to show you the most common ones, the ones that are also promoted on YouTube. These are the ones I've seen most often, and I've also often seen them presented in a rather inaccurate way. They only show you the wrong variations, right? Suddenly these gambits, these chess tricks are made out to be ultimate weapons, game-destroying tools. But that's not the case. I hope today I showed you the refutations to these gambits. So that's all for today, as usual. If you want to support the channel, subscribe and do all those things that good YouTuber subscribers do, which I am not, no. I hope sometimes I am. Alright guys, bye everyone and see you next time.